We are going to request that everybody hold their questions till after our presentation. If you do have a question in between, go ahead and put it in the chat. And we want to try to get a record. We want to make sure that everybody hears all the questions or can see the questions in the chat so that when we answer them, we have a record of it. So we're going to be using that to create our frequently asked questions document. And Mitch, could you mute yourself? I always get a little bit of feedback sometimes when you're on your stuff. Thanks. So I am Kirsten Elliott, and I'm the president and CEO of Community Housing Network. And we are presenting today our IDD Housing Access Pilot Program, or the IHAP, because if you're in housing, you know you got to have acronyms. Overview. So Jenna, can you go to the next slide, please? So here's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be going a quick welcome. We're going to go over our introductions. And then we're going to go over the pilot program. We're going to go over the RFP and then have questions and answers. And like I said, we have a pretty robust overview of the RFP to hopefully answer all your questions. And then we will be wrapping up. All right, Jenna. So this is the main team working on the IHAP program right now. So myself, Kirsten Elliott, Jenna Harper, who is our administrator supervisor at CHN, and she's also acting as project manager. And we are consulting with Red Maple Resources, which with Mitch Alexander and Vic Alba. So we're really grateful they're able to join our team and make this happen. Next slide. So if everybody could go ahead and put your name, your organization if applicable, and then the region of Michigan that you represent in the chat so we know who's here in the quote unquote room. That would be great. And then as you're doing that, I will keep going. So here's a little bit of brief overview of the IHAP program. MISTA, specifically Amy Hovey, approached Community Housing Network probably sometime during the summer to see if we would be interested in creating and administering a program that would be specifically geared towards creating units for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. This is funded through the Housing and Community Development Fund. And I will say that this is a much needed, and I'm going to say right now, unprecedented opportunity for the folks who have intellectual and developmental disabilities, or IDD, to be able to have housing that would be created and housing units created specifically for this population. There are not a lot of resources in the affordable housing space to create dedicated units for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Community Housing Network, we have been in operations for over 25 years, and I have been with Community Housing Network the full time. And we have a long history of creating permanent supportive housing, specifically working with the IDD population and creating housing for folks with IDD, utilizing a whole range of financing mechanisms. And then we also have a long history of doing real estate development using the tax credit program, permanent supportive housing for folks that are exiting homelessness, and we work across the state. So we have a lot of experience working with like the 811 program, home program, housing, what is it? I'm going to say affordable housing program funds through the Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis. So we have a lot of experience working with this. And so Mishta's like, can you help us with this? Because we also know we work very closely with the behavioral health systems in Oakland and Macomb County, specifically on the IDD side of making sure that we are creating those supported living environments and making sure that the supports are configured appropriately and that people have the opportunity to live in the least restrictive setting. So this is one of the reasons why we were selected to create and administer this program. Also, really quick, just go back one, Jenna. and I'm going to talk about this later, part of this program is also offering targeted technical assistance to smaller and emerging developers. This program is also very much in line with the statewide housing plan to make sure that we're creating more housing within our state. And so much of that is a big part of that statewide housing plan is to have more developers that are able to navigate the development process so that we can get more units created. So we will be offering that too, and we'll talk more about that. Okay, next slide. So the goals and deliverables of the program are to create at least 30 new affordable units for households or people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And because we are using community and housing development funds, we do have some statutory targets that we have to meet. And so those are at least 75% of the funds must support households at or below 30% AMI. And the remaining can go up to the remaining 25% can go up to 60%. And again, those are the statutory targets of the Housing and Community Development Fund. We're looking to support at least a minimum of 3 mixed income, mixed ability developments across Michigan. And we're going to there is a requirement of long-term affordability for the projects. And we're going to talk more about all of this later. So a minimum deed restriction of 10 years for rental and a minimum of 5-year deed restriction for sale projects. We are going to be offering down payment assistance of up to $50,000 per eligible IDD homebuyer. And I will say, just stepping back a little bit, this is a pilot program, and so we're really working to try to find creative and innovative ways to deploy these funds to support a whole range of housing options for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So becoming a home buyer, yes. Also working with special needs trusts, which we're going to talk about more. So we're kind of looking at doing some groundbreaking stuff, especially working with trying to figure out how do we help to create home ownership within a special needs trust. And we're going to go over what those are. And another thing I forgot to mention on the previous slide is that right now, this RFP is covering year 1, and this is going to be a 2-year pilot program. So there'll be funding for the next year for fiscal year 27. So if a developer who is on the call right now has ideas but isn't necessarily shovel ready yet, and we're going to go over what shovel ready means, do know that with technical assistance is that we want to help you get ready to apply for next year if maybe this year isn't the year to do it, because we do have limited funds each year, but we are going to have, it's a 2-year pilot program. So next slide. So there are definitions in the RFP, and I am assuming that everybody here has seen the RFP and has had a chance to peruse it. But a couple definitions I wanted to rise up here are disability forward developments. And these are projects that are going to prioritize the accessibility and for people with disabilities through inclusive design and inclusion within the community, with the goal of avoiding segregation, and so that people have the opportunity to live next door to other people with different life experiences. That is one of the core values of inclusion at Community Housing Network. So this is super important. Again, people with intellectual developmental disabilities, these are generally, this is a very open kind of definition of this, not necessarily per the Social Security Code, but just to kind of give a setting of who we're talking about the target population is. I did mention special needs trusts, qualifying special needs trusts. So special needs trusts are trusts that are developed to benefit people with disabilities so that they can have assets that could benefit them, which will safeguard their needs-based benefits. their Medicaid, most importantly. So many people with disabilities need to have the Medicaid because that's what gives them their daily supports, be able to live independently. And so people can have money left to them, and it can go into a special needs trust. And it's more, I'm not going to go into all the, it could be first party or third party. And we can probably, during our technical assistance, we'll have a whole session about special needs trust for those that are interested and how they work. But just to know that those are that's a thing that we're really working with and trying to help people utilize those to have home ownership and more longer term security for their housing. And then universal design. We want to make sure that all of the housing that is developed through this program is fully accessible, and more than just fully accessible, ADA accessible, but it is taking into consideration the full needs of people with disabilities, specifically people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Quick example, if you're doing just ADA design, you're not necessarily that's not necessarily going to be accommodating to people who are in power chairs or people who have respirators. So it's really important that we're making this housing that is fully accessible for the whole neurodiversity and everything. So next slide. And I don't know, I think I might be done. I am done, and I'm going to turn it over to Mitch and Vic, and they're going to go over the details of the RFP. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kirsten, and good morning. It's great to see so many people who have, slogged through the bad weather to virtually get on to this meeting. So I'm going to start helping our presentation get into more of the details, of the RFP and the program. One thing I want to emphasize right up front is that, we want to be as accessible as possible between now and when submissions are due on February 5th. Accessible to questions that you have. So we have a couple of ways to do this. One is we will be publishing FAQs, and probably more than once during the period leading up to the submission. So with questions that you present to us today and future questions that we receive will be packaged, and then they'll be emailed out. We'll have a link on our website to the FAQs. And then if there's questions that are maybe more specific to a project, concept that you have, we can schedule like one-on-one meetings to talk, about your project. So let me go over the rest of the timeline here on this slide. So you can see the target dates for when we're looking at releasing FAQs this month and then in January. If needed, we'll do one more, even a third set of FAQs. So we set a deadline of January 21st for any questions that would be able to be included in the FAQs. If you have other questions leading up to the day of submission that are more technical, like, I'm trying to work with this portal that we have to put everything in and I can't quite do it, certainly anytime within business hours, we can help you with the techie type of questions. So then February 5th, we have our submissions due, and it's by 5 p.m. Eastern time. And then our target is April 17th to make our award announcements. And then the next phase after that would be working with the awardees so that we can get to the stage where we would be being able to execute commitments. And so the date that we need to have those commitments executed by is August 30th. So are there anything else, Kirsten or Vic, you'd want to add to the timeline before we move on?
The only other thing I want to add is that this is a very aggressive timeline, and that's because we literally have a year to get our commitments done. So we have to have the first tranche of funding committed by the end of September at the very latest.
So I see that Jenna and I had like the same idea at the same moment. So now you have two chats in there with our email address. So that is the best way to contact us with questions or requests for meetings. Through our housing access program, we have a total of $1.7 million, and it's I'm going to talk in over a couple of slides about how the money is being directed into different types of projects. So we have half the money, $850,000, set aside for multifamily rental projects, and then the other half of $850,000 is for home ownership projects, and that home ownership includes both funding requests that could go to support development activities. So really meeting any kind of development activity ranging from, acquisition to the kind of soft costs where you're paying for things like architects and engineers and other good stuff, and also for construction. But home ownership also presents an opportunity to request funding to help with down payment assistance for the folks that would be purchasing the units that would be developing. Now you could, could you go back for a moment? There's a little small type at the bottom that I want to lift up, and that's about potentially community housing network. As we go through the process of reviewing applications, we might adjust these targets and award amounts. Since this is a pilot, we're learning a lot ourselves, by our experience of interacting with you and the application, the concepts you have and the applications you submit. So if we find that we're getting like a lot of requests, in one area, we may adjust these amounts so that like multifamily may end up getting awards of more than 850,000. Just want to highlight we're going to be CHN is going to be conscious of that as we go through the review of applications. So now I'm ready for the next slide. Thanks. So for this funding, we wanted to clarify, is it in the form of a grant or a loan or equity? And for the most part, almost, way most of the time, this will be in the form of a grant. But, we're aware that there are some specialized cases where an affordable housing project, for technical reasons, can't accept grants. And mostly what I'm referring to is projects that utilize low-income housing tax credits, or LIHTC, as they're called. And so, I don't want to go down the road of explaining more detail than that, but I do want to emphasize that if there's a structure for affordable housing project where there's other sources, and one of those sources really needs funding to come in as a loan, that's something that we could work with the developer and the funding source, so things could be structured in that way. So one other thing to mention is that we'll be accepting one request per project, so one grant per project. So either a developer will be putting an application for development assistance for a multifamily project, or it would be development assistance for a home ownership project, or the one application could be a request for down payment assistance. Next slide, please. And now, Kirsten, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you. So as I said, this is permanent supportive housing technically for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so we want to make sure that the developer or the development team. It doesn't necessarily have to be the developer that is going to be providing the services, but that those community connections are there and that the team understands the needs of the targeted population. So there is a whole community inclusion and supportive services plan, which talks about what is the setting type and the location, what is the integration of folks with IDD, what is the service model, what are those connections to the service providers. We fully understand that you're not going to have committed, a 10-year commitment of support dollars for that individual. We understand that the way that dollars come to support these individuals, it's through their I want to almost call it an IEP. That's school. Their person-centered plan, and then with their plan of service. So we understand you're working, most likely are going to be working with your community mental health providers, and if they're not at that level of being serviced through community mental health, there's other types of services that might be needed, such as transportation or in-home supports or whatever it is. And so we just really are looking at this to make sure that the developer has a team, either A, understands themselves and knows how to support these individuals for success, or that they have a team of individuals that they understand who they're working with, and so that these individuals are going to be supported and included in the community. Yeah, I think that's it. And then there is a prorated scoring rubrics, and it's all laid out in the RFP. And so we can talk about questions on that. And Vic is going to go over much of that later. So thanks.
Okay, I'll go and take it back on. And I did want to say, for folks that may have joined a little later, we're glad that you got on. We're asking everyone to put in the chat their name, their organization, and the part of Michigan that they do their work in. So we appreciate if you could do that. Because we didn't have a registration for the webinar, so that putting your contact information in the chat will help us know who's interested and who's attended the webinar. Also, this webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be posted on in the website for folks to reference. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about the way that our grant funding could be used. And one thing we have tried to do is to make it as flexible as possible. So in terms of like housing, we are trying to allow for a diverse type of housing types and, like projects. So if it's you have a project involves single family homes, duplex homes, fourplex, multifamily, like any kind of type of structure in the housing is something we really want to work with. I mentioned a short time ago, for the costs, when we're talking about requests for development activities for rental or home ownership, it's like the full range of costs are eligible in a request. We know that in some projects there could be, one or many other sources of funding. That's something that's usually a part of a project that more broadly we might call affordable, housing. And, we will work with the requirements, of the, other funders. For applicants, again, there's a range of applicants that we've envisioned, whether it's developers, even individual home buyers when it comes to down payment assistance, and special needs trusts, again, when it's home ownership for a home ownership project. And I'll explain what we define as experienced or emerging developers in a moment. And then for leverage, again, we expect that there'll be a number of applications that come in with other sources of funding. So we want to, in those kind of cases, like we want to be the piece that can, like really help, that perhaps you as a developer have gone out and gotten your main or your a couple of your biggest sources of funding in place, but you have a gap, and you're also want to target some of the units for the IDD population. So like, we love the idea that we could be part of like filling that gap that can help everything else move forward. And when we talk about leverage for down payment assistance, also there could be other types of down payment assistance that you're able to bring in, and we can work with that as well. So let's go to the next slide. Now there is, a couple of restrictions that we have to point out, in how the funding can be combined potentially with other sources of funding. For our IHAP program, the source of the funding is through MISHDA's Housing and Community Development Fund, HCDF. And so if your project has funding with some other component of HCDF, unfortunately, the IHAP funding can't live in the same project with something else that's sourced from HCDF. We're not going to fund licensed group homes, so we're targeting a population of people with the IDD population that can live with supports, but outside of a licensed group home setting. And then when there's a closing on a project so that all the funding's in place and construction can commence, deed restrictions would be executed, and those deed restrictions would mean that for a rental project, there's a 10-year period, and for a home ownership project, a 5-year period, and this is designed to maintain the affordability of the project during the restriction period. So next slide, please. So, one of the other goals of IHAP is that we want people in the IDD population to be part of the overall community, and so to have that kind of diversity, we have a couple of guidelines. One is for larger projects. If a project's larger than 20 units, the ceiling would be that 25% of those units at the max could be for the IDD population. And then for, it's what I call medium-sized projects, there's flexibility on working with the developer on how many units potentially would be for the IDD population. And then for smaller projects from 1 to 4 units, having all those units occupied by IDD individuals would be okay. So also this shows you too that we're really, looking at small projects as small as 1 unit to larger projects as as part of making the project, the program as flexible as possible. So next slide, please. So here's those definitions I referred to a moment ago about experienced or emerging developer. So what we're thinking for an experienced developer is somebody that has completed 3 or more projects of a comparable housing type that the application would be describing. And then also that the developer has completed 1 project that includes units designated for the IDD population or permanent supportive housing. For an emerging developer, we are describing an emerging developer as somebody that has completed less than 3 projects of a similar housing type and has not completed a project that would be for the IDD population or for permanent supportive housing. So, next slide, please. So here's some more information about funding caps for a project. And for all projects, we have a ceiling of $500,000 for application requests that come from experienced developers, and $300,000 is the project cap for emerging developers. When we look at a rental project, development activities it could be requested, or funding for development activities could be requested up to 100,000 per unit. And so we have the cap of per unit, and then also the per project cap that we're trying to describe here. When we look at development activities for a for sale project, the cap is also 100,000 per unit. And then for down payment assistance, the cap is $50,000 per unit, whether it's directly with an IDD individual or with a qualified special needs trust holding title to the property. So next slide, please. And now I'm going, I think here that I turn it over to Vic to walk us through the submission package requirements.
Yes, thanks, Mitch. Good morning, everybody. So Kirsten and Mitch got the exciting stuff going over the program and the RFP, and I get the boring kind of checklists and submission requirements. So hang with me if it gets a little dense. But I'm going to talk about kind of what we're going to be looking for in a successful submission and what you need to submit, and how we're going to evaluate things. So a lot of this is pretty typical for those of you who've applied for funding sources, government or private. So most of this is not going to be, something unusual or new, but we're going to need, same kinds of things that you've, as an applicant, put together probably before. So a comprehensive project summary, as much detail as you can on your purposes and goals for the project, and kind of the basic project parameters and who you're trying to serve and that kind of thing. The discussion of the developer's experience. Mitch talked about, emerging or experienced categories. So information that'll help us determine that, and along with the development team members and their qualifications and experience as well, and how the project is going to meet affordability guidelines for the IDD units, but if it's part of a larger affordable housing project, as well as the other units too. The need and demand for the units designated for IDD persons, I'll talk about that more in a little bit, but we need to understand and evaluate, that it's going to be successful leasing to the population that we're trying to serve, and of course, project timeline. The cover sheet, there'll be a template in the portal once you get access to that, and that'll include kind of basic information on the project and developers, so we have that at our fingertips. Go ahead to the next slide. So some things are common to a development project, whether it be rental or single family, for sale, but making sure that nobody on the development team has been debarred, had a bad experience with previous government sources or something like that. So there's a attestation form that will be, I think you'll see a copy of it in an addendum in the RFP, but there'll be a document in the portal to actually sign. Mitch went over, experienced and emerging developers. So we need information from an applicant to show which category they're in and which projects they've been able to successfully complete in the past, along with the development teams, same kind of thing, experience. Financial capacity, so we'll review financial statements. These are the standards that we're going to look at as we go over the statements and look at the capacity of an organization or applicant financially. I'm not going to go into everything in detail. You have it in the RFP, so I don't want to bore you too much. So some of the other common requirements, Kirsten noted that we have specific timelines to make commitments. So we do need to see a shovel-ready project. So site control, which can be in the form at the application point of a purchase agreement, doesn't have to be outright control then, but certainly as we move through the review and into the commitment phase, we'll need to see that. But a purchase agreement or some other evidence of site control is all right. For the February submission, local approvals and entitlements, including any community engagement, and of course a phase 1 environmental report. Financing commitments, we do need to see that a senior lender has reviewed the project and is interested and has provided some basic terms. So an LOI, a term sheet or a commitment letter, if you have it at application, is great. but at least an LOI from the lender or LIHTC reservation letter if it's a LIHTC project. And from other soft sources, at least a soft LOI. We understand a lot of government sources don't commit until late in the project. So, but if it is a key, source in the project, we do need to see that they're planning to invest. Go ahead. So earlier, Kirsten talked about how MISTA established a Michigan state or a statewide housing plan for the state of Michigan. And within that, there's 15 regions. All of them have co-leads, leads or co-leads. And we need to see that an applicant has talked with those leads and got a support letter that it fits with the goals that the specific region has set out for their area. There's a link in the RFP to both the statewide plan and on the same page, I believe, are the regions are listed. So you can figure out if you haven't been active with that process already, where you are, who to talk to. If you're having any trouble connecting with somebody, let us know. We can probably help with that. But we do need to see you take kind of the initiative to make sure the project fits with those goals. Demand and need, I mentioned earlier, we're not requiring you to get a market study specific to the IDD units. If you have one for a LIHTC project or something like that, please submit it. But to show the demand for those specific units, we need you to provide some data on a local market that shows that it's going to be successful, reaching the population that we all want to serve, and that that the project's going to be successful doing that. Sorry, whether it be rental or home ownership. Kirsten also talked about the Community Inclusion and Supportive Services Plan, and there's an addendum A in the RFP, and there's 7 points that she kind of alluded to or went over that you'll need to, and an applicant will need to respond to. The project team will need to understand that and design around that. And we also recommend that an applicant is familiar with the home and community-based services settings rule in the Medicaid program. Judging from the people on this call, I imagine most of you are already familiar with that. So if you're working with an applicant or something like that who's not, make sure that they go over that and are familiar with how an IDD individual can be live autonomously and have a good quality of life, living in these units. Go ahead to the next slide. So this is specific to rental projects. Again, nothing really new, but we need to see a complete development budget with detail around all the sources and uses, including the terms of the different sources, a 10-year pro forma projecting out revenues and expenses with detail on each, so we can determine, the project's going to be feasible. A lot of this you'll have probably submitted already to other sources, so can use the same format and templates and things that another lender might require or investor might require. Affordability levels, we talked about it earlier, but there's also links in the RFP to the affordability charts for each county that we're going to be looking at. So you can refer to that in the RFP itself. Go ahead, Jenna. Then on a for sale development, somebody who might be developing a number of single family homes to sell to IDD and other individuals. Similar to the last slide, but we'll need a development budget with all sources and uses described and detailed. And typically you wouldn't have like a 10-year pro forma, but in lieu of that would be, kind of final financial projections on sales price, holding costs, estimated closing costs for the individual buying a house. And same with property taxes, less any abatements that might be available in that local area. Any non-IHAB down payment assistance, since IHAB wouldn't be eligible for this, but there might be other local or statewide down payment assistance available, and mortgage terms that the buyer's likely to be able to track and kind of present it in a monthly schedule. Again, not anything terribly unusual for a for sale project. So we're happy to talk about that more if you have questions later on. For an application around down payment assistance, a home buyer needs to submit these items. so that we can determine the individual's income level, the affordability of the home, and the feasibility of being able to make the mortgage payments. So these are the items that we're going to look at to determine that. Go ahead. And then we'll use those documents to kind of determine these things that I kind of talked about already, using these ratios, and that the buyer has the ability to make at least 1% payment. Could be more if so chosen, but at least a minimum of 1%. And we'll need to see that third bullet, kind of estimated taxes and insurance payments, so we can get a picture of the whole amount that's going to be needed to make payments on the mortgage and the taxes and insurance. Sorry if I'm stumbling around a little bit on that one. I apologize. Go ahead to the next slide. Earlier, there was talked about special needs trusts. So if the applicant is a S&T, then from that, we're going to need to see items specific to the trust. Typically, a trust, in my understanding, is fully funded, but if there's one that has regular contributions in the trust, maybe a family member makes an annual payment or something like that, we would need to see a schedule of that. It isn't the typical way a trust is set up, but if that is the way that one is, then we'll need to see it. Schedule regular expenditures from the trust for the beneficiary's living expenses, and basically a balance sheet on the trust. And we'll use all that to determine if the trust is able to make payments. We want to see at least 5 times, the number of 5 times in assets the amount that the mortgage is going to be including the new housing payments. So that's kind of the benchmark we'll be looking at. Go ahead to the next slide. We talked about the 5-year retention period earlier. So in this case, for down payment assistance, if the home was sold before that 5-year period is up, to be compliant for us, we need to recoup the amount of down payment assistance that had been prorated over 5 years, so 20% per year. In other words, if it's sold in year 3, we'll need to recoup about 60% of the amount that was allocated. So that's going to be spelled out in the deed restriction. Go ahead. Okay, changing gears a little bit. It was referenced that we'd have technical assistance available. That can be in the form of kind of general one-on-one TA questions around the RFP, any clarifications, something maybe specific to your project that we didn't cover on this call. So we can schedule that through the email that's been shared already. Also starting in March, there'll be kind of general office hours that'll go over the development process and different aspects of that, and selecting development team and things like that that can help you get ready for a future round. We'll release more details and dates and things in February on that. We haven't fully planned it out yet, but we'll probably have something monthly. What CHN and the team cannot do is to really act as a developer consultant looking at grant agreements or legal documents, representing an applicant in municipal processes, or looking at financing applications. So really not more than what the role is appropriate to help somebody get an application together, but not really acting as a member of the development team. So go ahead. I believe that's it for my portion of the presentation here, and off to Mitch.
Thanks, Vic, and thanks for going through all that detail. So I'll talk about design standards, and actually I saw Chris Bennett put in the chat question about standards, so this is good timing. So we're looking of course for projects that are going to maximize features that are important to have in place for people with IDD. And so some of the kind of standards or factors we'd like developers to consider: universal design, inclusive design standards, which have been published by the Kelsey Center. Section 504 accessibility requirements, neuro-inclusive design, and there's an example of that through the Autism Housing Network's guide called A Place in the World, which really goes over lots of information around developing projects for the IDD population, and has a couple of sections in there that are really helpful about thinking through design. And then something that's more broader than just projects specific to a specific population, but for affordable housing, in general, the idea of having designs that incorporate green and energy efficiency, so that the people that are then renting or have purchased their housing will, also have, more economical costs as they are living in their home, and that, overall, that, the footprint of that home on, our environment too, is less than it might otherwise have been. So, we don't have like specific programs standards for IHAP. So what we're looking for as developers put together applications is to talk about decisions that they're making on design and how those connect with the people that will be living in those projects. So factors like mobility that address the needs of people that be living in the units, or technology features that help make a unit more accessible and livable for people in the IDD population. There's many different possibilities. So we're want to give a chance for developers to also figure that out and figure out what is best for their project, given other parameters, such as overall cost, overall funding that's available for the project, and whether maybe affected by a rehab compared to new construction. And this is also an example where we could have a one-on-one meeting with somebody. Certainly we're welcome to having a meeting focused on the design of a project to help talk through and give a better understanding of what our expectations might be for a specific project, or the population that project is especially trying to serve. So let's go to the next slide. And for the submission process, I'm going to turn it over to Jenna. So you get a chance to present on your first slide, Jenna.
Yes, thank you, Mitch. Okay, I really quickly just wanted to go over the submission process to make sure that it was clear, and if anyone had any questions that they'd have a chance to ask at the end. As we mentioned before, submissions are due February 5th, 2026 at 5 p.m. And how this will work is on our IHAP webpage, which you see linked here, and I can reshare the link a little bit later. You'll scroll down and see our RFP application interest form. And so on this form, you'll provide your name, your email, and your organization. If you are not applying on behalf of an organization, please just put in your last name in that field, because that is what will automatically create and name your OneDrive folder. So from there, we will manually share this OneDrive with you. So it is really important that the email you provide is associated with a Microsoft account. This is free and super easy to do if you aren't already associated with one. And I also provided a link within the form. So it's super easy to access. And we do ask that one submission on this form is created per organization, just because it will automatically create a OneDrive. So just to avoid any duplicity or duplication or anything of that nature. And of course, if you have any questions, we are available via email. I'll reshare in the chat as well. It's iddhousing@chninc.net. I really want to amplify that the email and web page are sort of like the hub for all the information. As Mitch mentioned before, we will be updating and posting FAQs to the web page. So that will be where you'll go to see any updates that we create. And also the email is just, the quickest, easiest way for us to be able to get back to you and get any questions. As mentioned before, we will be taking the questions that are talked about today during this meeting, and then also just what is emailed to us throughout this whole process to create the FAQs. And then, lastly, we just want to say that each application will be reviewed for completion. So please make sure to follow the checklist to ensure that you have everything properly submitted before the deadline. And I will pass it, I believe, back to Mitch to go over our evaluation and scoring criteria.
Hey, thank you, Jenna. So, so this, of course, is in the RFP. And so we have like several factors addressing, key parts of the development team and the project. The first is experience and capacity, and I know, and that's worth 20 points. The total, well, maybe give a quick overview here. The total points we structured at 120, and I'll mention in a moment, there's opportunity for 2 elements that would give bonus points. But out of the 120 points, 20 goes to experience and capacity. Project readiness is 25 points. Financing commitments, having those in place, are 15 points. Feasibility, all the information that would be presented in an application to help us determine the feasibility of the project, is at 20 points. Then the information that's provided specifically through the community inclusion and supportive services plan is 20 points. For design and construction, that's also 20 points. Then the 2 elements that could result in bonus points include leveraging other sources. And then the second element would be affordability commitments extending beyond the minimum levels required by our program. So that gets back to the idea that IHAP is requiring a 10-year restriction for rental, 5-year for home ownership on affordability. And so if an applicant is willing to extend that for a longer period of time, then 5 points will be added to the score. So next slide, please. And then we have a slide on the submission checklist. So for that, I'm going to turn it back to our checklist expert, Vic.
Yeah, more of the boring information. Thanks, Mitch. But there are checklists included in the RFP. Again, I'm not going to go through every bullet point to not bore you too much, and I talked about some of this already, but the project overview, the cover sheet will be a document in the portal, a narrative, as I discussed, with as much detail as you can provide, and the need and demand, qualifications of the developer and the team members, along with the financial statements like audits if you're a nonprofit, or recent year-end and quarterly statements for year-end for a couple of years, so we can look at any trends and things like that. The source and uses pro forma or scale schedule, along with the LOIs and financing commitments. I talked about project readiness and community and program requirements already. Again, there are specific checklists in the RFP that you can refer back to and kind of go through one by one as you're putting a submission together. Go ahead. Now this is for the following phase. After an award is made, we wanted to show what would be required then to get to a commitment. So this is not what's needed, initially, but maybe over the summer as awards made in April or announced in April, and then trying to get to a commitment. So a lot of it is really updating things. Certainly between February and May, June, July, numbers will have changed. Things like that. We'll need to see updated financial statements. It will be at least a quarter having passed by then. Sorry, I kind of skipped over number one, but legal documents for the organization and partnership agreements, things like that. And then jumping back down to number three, phase one probably will be needing to be updated at that point. We've seen that a million times, at least I have. And then if required, a phase two environmental, if there's any contamination or RECs identified, the phase two document should be in hand by then. And then a couple new items like an appraisal, permits, and anything else that might have changed regarding the project over the last few months. Go ahead to the next slide. This is related more to single family acquisition. Sorry, the last one was more on rental projects. But now if developing a number of single family homes, we'll need to see the information on the borrower, the S&T. I talked about these kinds of things earlier. A purchase agreement for the house, evidence of qualifying for a mortgage, the estimated taxes and closing costs, and the quote for insurance, title policy. That's going to all be required for submission. Then on the right side of the slide, to get to a commitment, any updated income information, commitment for a mortgage, an actual insurance policy as opposed to a quote, the appraisal, and then legal documents around the S&T and the relationship between it and the beneficiary disclosures. Go ahead. So I think that's it for the body of our presentation, only about an hour. And a lot of information we covered. So Kirsten, Jenna, Mitch, and I are available for questions now. I'm sure there's already been some in the chat. I haven't had a chance to monitor it. So Jenna, I don't know if there's anything you want to read off quickly or we just want to open it up to people.
Well, actually, there's something I just want to mention before we go to Q&A, and that's for like our emerging developers. Like if you were just listening during the presentation to all these requirements, and maybe you were thinking, oh my goodness, that is a lot. I've maybe it could be somebody where, oh, I have a couple of small multifamily properties. I've never participated in a larger project that has these kind of requirements, but I'm interested in the program. A couple of things I want to re-emphasize is that we will have the workshops next year to help, and may mean leading to an application, hopefully then in what will be the second round, and then one-on-one meetings, publishing the FAQs is another way, too, that for somebody that would fall into the emerging developer category, hopefully it would take some of the oh my goodness part of it away and help you feel more confident about developing an application that could be submitted.
Perfect.
Well, so we do have a couple questions already in the chat, but I do want to reiterate that this is, completely open. Feel free to unmute, raise your hand, so we can have an open discussion about anything that you may that may have arisen while we were talking. But first, Chris asked, for rental, does the 10-year deed restriction become effective at the time of closing or at construction completion? And Chris, feel free to unmute and come in as well.
Yeah, it's a small thing, right? You're talking about, a 10 or 12 month difference, but I'm just curious if it's capturing the total term after construction completion or if construct, it's a detail thing. I was just curious. Yeah.
So Chris, I'm going to say that I'm going to have to go back to MSHDA and ask specifically. So some of these questions I'm going to have to go back to MSHDA, but it could be, I'm thinking it's going to be either construction completion or it's going to be lease up.
Okay.
Or occupancy, because really we're going to have to verify income levels of occupancy. for each individual living in the units at the initial occupancy, but not ongoing. So I'm thinking it's going to be occupancy as opposed
That
to
would be my
construction
assumption
completion.
too. Okay.
But I'm going to need to get verification from MSHDA.
Okay. Can I ask one more question while I've got
Absolutely.
the hog on the mic here?
Yeah.
So in a similar question, I think to Grace earlier, we're looking at taking a 48 unit existing residential building and rehabbing some units for this RFP. When you're looking at that kind of development, we have enterprise green community standards. Does that have to apply to the entire building then, or just to those 5 units? And then if the latter of the two, how would we quantify that?
So I will say that with regards to funding for current projects or any new projects, so as long as we're adding additional units for folks with IDD, so so we could do acquisition, we can do preservation. It sounds like that's preservation kind of.
Yeah.
And you want to set aside units in that preservation deal for IDD. So those would be new IDD units. So that would be eligible. I'm going to answer your question about enterprise green separately. And then, but if it's a project that's already for IDD and you're just wanting to recapitalize it and do preservation for that, that's not adding to new additional units. So I would say that it would have to be adding new units. If you already have a project in process that is already targeting this, or like you said, Chris, even if it's not a preservation where you're at, you have like a new construction projects and you want to add IDD units, but it's already within well along the development process, that would definitely be eligible too.
Okay.
Now, and then I'm going to also defer to Vic and Mitch on the enterprise green question. I would say, and forgive me if I'm speaking out of turn here, Vic and Mitch, but the goal is for the units to be have green qualities. So if it's enterprise green, that's great. But if you have a different comparable certification level, that would be acceptable too.
Okay.
And then with regards to only to those units or the whole development, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm like, I don't know how you would do it to just a couple of units and get the certification and not all of the development. But
it's an existing building. That's why I'm asking. It was built in like mid-90s.
Right.
We're just looking
so if there's other green standards that would meet those that could help, then we could have a conversation about that. Mitch and Vic, do you guys have anything to add to that?
I mean, it sounds like it would be good maybe to meet one-on-one and talk it.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, if you shoot an email, Chris, and then we'll respond and we could set up a time to talk.
Can it be used to update a current project with green standards or not?
Could you repeat that, Grace?
Yeah, could you use the funding to update? I know you said that it has to be additional units, and if you wanted to make those green, but also update other units that are not following green standards, could you use that as well?
I'm not sure I'm following. So are you suggesting that you have a project?
We currently have two separate buildings that are for IDD people with their in the IDD. And I'm still not even quite sure how much we need for this, but we have current projects, but also want to add additional units. And you said to have them up to give them green standards, correct? Mm-hmm. You want them to have that. What if the other ones that we have within the building are not? Can we use that to update all of them to have green standards for all the units?
Mitch?
Yeah, so I think, Grace, what you're asking if is some of the funding from the grant through IHAP be used to update, green standards on other units where the people would not be IDD residents. And so,
no, they are IDD residents.
Oh, they are IDD residents.
Yes, correct.
So I'm sorry, they're currently IDD residents, or they be?
Yes,
okay.
They are correct. Yes.
Well, I think we're looking for the creation of new units, within a preservation
Right.
project. It's maybe, well, none of the folks in there, the units have not been dedicated to IDD residents, and now some number will be, so that we'd be able to fund those quote unquote new units.
Okay.
Yeah. And
But I was asking about the green standards as well. If we are adding if we're adding new units, for example, and the entire building is not up to green standards, can we use that funding to update the entire building? Is what I'm asking.
So I would say that the funds for this are for the creation of the new units that you would be developing. But if they're part of like a larger development pro forma, I'm assuming that there would be other sources of fund that could help that, right? So you could, while you're doing that, it would probably have a cost savings of updating the other units, but you would have to find the funding for the other units within that bigger development pro forma.
Okay, thank you.
And we can talk offline too about that very specific.
And I guess maybe one thing I'd add, Kirsten, is well, like generally there's a project, and the budget's $1 million for the entire project, and there's IDD units, where altogether the cost there would be $200,000. There's also maybe it's the roof is being replaced, or it's a new project and a new roof's being put on, and so like we understand that like the building systems, too, are part of what would be able to make it possible for IDD units to be created.
Yeah, so they would pay a proportion of the new roof or the new furnace or the new whatever. Okay, so Pam DeBono asked, for large projects, is there a minimum of ID units, or is that driven by of 100,000 developer cost mix per unit? Yes, that is, there's not a minimum. It's driven by the caps. And is there an expectation of deadline of when the actual 30 estimated units will come online for lease up? That's going to be variable, and I am still working with MSHDA to get the final when they want to have the project completion done. It just depends upon what year the funding is coming from. So I'm still waiting, and we're still working that out with MSHDA. But I'm going to say that it's going to be within probably 18 months to 2 years of commitment at a minimum.
That's
and
pretty fast for new projects that have been even approved. But you think it'll be that?
Like I said, I'm going to verify with MSHDA. Like we have asked that question, and they're still working that out. But yeah. Wait, and you have one more question. And so stay here. Does home assets sit inside SNT, or is in the name of the owner directly? We're looking to see if it can sit inside of the SNT if the SNT accepts the asset, if that makes sense. So we'll need a certification that from the trustee that it will accept the house or the unit into the SNT. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in the owner's name. If the beneficiary will have to be clearly the beneficiary for that SNT. If that makes sense.
So it could be either or. It could sit inside the trust, or it could be owned outright, and that person would still maintain their Medicaid and public benefits.
That's the goal, and we're going to have to make sure that we're deferring each individual to their lawyers and to their attorneys about that to make sure that they're fine.
This is wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, we will work on getting a transcript out, and we're going to get notes out for the session also. Are unlicensed group homes ineligible along with licensed group homes? No, unlicensed homes are also, those would be considered supported, and I consider those supported independent units or settings, not necessarily a licensed group home or a group home per se. I know people use that word interchangeably, a group home and supported independent placement, but in an unlicensed setting, the individual, if it's unlicensed, we would expect, though, that each individual would have a lease in their own name, would have their own room, would have their, that's why we talked about with the home and community-based settings rules. While we understand that the in Michigan, the home and community-based settings rules don't necessarily apply to non-owner, or it doesn't apply to things that are not owner operated. And it doesn't apply to, and it only applies to like licensed settings. However, we want to make sure that the spirit of housing community-based services rules, so having a lock in your door, having free access to food, not having home rules, we really want to uphold the dignity of people with disabilities. And so that's why we had talked about that. So yes, unlicensed settings are eligible.
Thank you.
And then let's see, Chris, you have to jump off. Thank you so much, and we look forward to having continued conversation. Okay, we're open for other questions. It's a lot to digest, and if you do have more questions, again, I'm going to do Jenna a favor, direct you to the email, and we'll be more than happy to answer you and get those onto the frequently asked questions. All right. Well, we'll stay on. So if you're all set and you wanted to move along, that's awesome. We are more than happy to give you a gift of time back. Oh wait, we have one from Jill Bartlett. Bartlett. For down payment assistance, is there a specific way to be designated as IDD homebuyers? In other words, is that a specific designation in and itself? It's not like an official I want to say designation. It just means that the individual or the beneficiary or the person who's going to be living in the home, so like does have an intellectual and developmental disabilities and does fall into the income qualifications. And does that answer your question? If not, go ahead and unmute yourself. Thank you. So like I was saying, if you have questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask. We'll stick around, but if you need to run, we totally understand. And thank you so much for your time and for your attention to this. I'm super excited that so many people joined, because that tells me that there's people who care about this issue and want to create more inclusive housing. Can this funding be used for acquisition and repairs? Shar, yes, it can be used for acquisition and rehab, as long at the end of the day, it's going to either be for rental to somebody with intellectual and developmental disabilities, or it's sold to a person with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Kirsten, this is Mike again. For the other sources element of the rubric, do you have any idea of what ratios you want to see there, as far as like how much of that funding this represents?
So we don't have like a solid target. We do have to leverage within the full grant amount. We do have to leverage to MSHDA 5 to 1. Is it 5 to 1? Yeah. 5 million to, I think it's 5 to 1,
Okay.
at a minimum to MSHDA. And we believe that based upon our experience with development projects, that we'll be easily able to get to that. And I don't remember, Vic, do you remember what the sliding scale is for to get the maximum bonus points for leverage?
Well, we gave up to 5 bonus points, so we didn't define exactly how to get, 5 versus a lower number. So we'll be, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that 5 to 1 ratio, that's all other funding sources?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And sorry, last question. With the updates to the FAQ and the transcript, are you going to make these slides available?
Yes.
Awesome.
Jenna?
Thank you, Kirsten.
Yes. Yes, we can make the recording, transcript, slides, everything available on the webpage that we shared.
Perfect. Thank you, Jenna.
Yeah, the webpage is on the screen now, so I would say check it regularly over the next week or two.
Great.
Okay, I have a question. This is Terry Albers. We are looking at developing an entire community for IDD. Is this something that would fall under, or do we have to have the percentage of neurodivergent within the community?
Yes,
and I'm talking, okay, so.
If I'm hearing you correctly, you're looking to create a whole community that would be for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Correct.
And this would be for mixed ability communities. So there could be a percentage of units set aside for IDD within a broader community.
Okay. Do you know if there's any grants specifically for a community for IDD? I mean, these would be individual rental homes and everything. Yeah, it's.
So Terry, we can talk about this. We can set up a separate meeting and talk about this.
Okay.
And I don't off the top of my head know of any, but we can. But let's talk and to make sure that what your vision is what I'm thinking here.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you.
Real quick clarification, Terry, are you thinking of over 20 units? I'm sorry if you answered that already. Or
No, I
less
didn't
than.
answer that. Yes, we are thinking of more around the range of about 40 units with duplexes or triplexes, a total community. But there would be access. There's much going on. It would be in the Frankenmuth area. And there's a lot that we would have available for community to come in and be involved in our community. But this would be, we're looking specifically to hopefully be able to have about 100 people with IDD in this community. I know it's something different, and
well, it is, and that's not what these funds are designed for. More of an inclusive development. So these funds wouldn't necessarily be a good match for that vision.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about the 25-75 split, the 75 had to be at 60% of AMI or lower, right?
No,
so
75% has to be at 30% and lower.
Sorry, yeah. So thinking about a similar project, that's going to be, a very small percentage of market rate. We're doing close to 80 units, but it's in different segments and projects. Can we look at this in the context of one of those kind of areas on the site? And I think to your point, it's very much in this inclusive environment, but ours would not work with having every unit limited to 60%.
You mean limited to 30%?
No, we can do the 75, right?
You can do the
my
75 at 30%.
well,
Just-
if we do a segment, right? So we have single family homes for home ownership, we have townhomes for home ownership, and we have multifamily. And then we have this kind of cohabitation on the project. So could we look at one element of the multifamily project and say within that unit, could we say that for the purposes of this 8 building or 8 unit multifamily project building within this bigger inclusive project, could we make that one element of it eligible, but the entire 77 units is not going to meet that threshold?
Oh, I think I hear what you're asking. You're asking just the targeted units are meeting the income limits, correct?
Yeah, one
So the rest of
one
your
building on a
development
much
would
larger
not.
site.
So, yeah, your rest
Yeah.
of your development would not need to meet those targeted AMIs, just the targeted units.
Got it. Okay.
Let me say
Thank you.
targeted more.
Yeah.
So yeah. When you start
Okay,
talking about
that's helpful.
targeted and the AMIs and everything, it can kind of get
Yeah.
mucky.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's
I
also
would
one
recommend,
program to have, to have
I would just say, I'd recommend scheduling time that we could flesh that out more. I think it's worth exploring, though. I don't want to write it off. I don't think any of us want to write it off today, but I think we should probably talk about it more and maybe understand better the overall picture.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd be happy to do that, because I think from this inclusive vision in the community, I think it would be an interesting potential addition. So yeah. So we'll work on getting some time scheduled.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to jump off. Thank you all so much. This was very helpful.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Likewise.